I'm looking forward to today's program, but before we hear it, I thought I would introduce you to three of the people I've been associated with for some time. And I think it will give you an idea of the range and complexity of the situation. Do notice how alone all these people are. Loneliness is a very big issue on the streets. The first gentleman is 67 years old, walked out of his apartment and left everything behind last July and came and squatted by the LA River in a secluded spot near where I live. He's well-educated, very articulate, loves to read, consumes my leftover Guardian weeklies and LA Times. He has money in the bank, does not claim any benefits, and gets great pleasure out of retrieving food from trash bins. His needs are very simple, and he is relaxed and happy. Although I worry about his safety, as there was a murder nearby last year. In medieval times, he would probably been considered a holy hermit, or in India, he might have been a sadhu, a holy beggar. However, here he is labeled mentally ill. His brothers have traced him, and I met with them yesterday to discuss how to respect his choice, keep him safe, and inch him back indoors. My second friend has had a rough life. He has been in jail several times and was homeless for 15 years in Hollywood. He is 54. He is now living in permanent supportive housing, which means a tiny apartment in an anonymous block with security and some support, where sadly he sits and stares at the wall. He has a history of drink problems and a few months ago fell off the wagon with serious consequences. A few of us have been going to court with him, and we wrote to the judge for plead for a non-custodial sentence so he won't be thrown back on the streets. She gave him 3 months with a cuff around his ankle, which somehow can send a signal back if he has any alcohol. And then once that was taken off, 3 months of intensive outpatient therapy, which seems like a long Alcoholics Anonymous class daily. He was in court on Wednesday, and so far so good. Now to help him find some work, fill up his time so he's not tempted to drink. My third friend is 77 years old, and he's been living in his truck since the mid-1990s. At one point, he had a voucher that could be used to look for somewhere to live, but he panicked and backed out. His security, his life is in his truck and his storage locker. He gets Social Security and seems to make ends meet with coming to various places to get free food and clothes and showers. However, he tells me that his health is beginning to go, and he seems to have shrunk dramatically in the last year. Right now, his truck is parked somewhere he considers safe, with a flat tire, a broken wing mirror, and it needs a smog test. He's not driving it, just sleeping in it. When vehicles cease to move or be legal, it can begin a slippery slope down. I chose those three because they are all different, but yet they're all people I know well, and it gives you an insight, hopefully, into just the range of situations that one comes across. And as I started by saying, loneliness is such a big issue, and that is one that I think would be interesting for us to address. Anyway, thank you for listening to me, and Anthony, I hope that kind of was a good intro to your thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rose, for all you do and for reminding us that people who are unhoused have stories, have lives, often have dreams, just like the rest of us. And you know, I just celebrated my 74th birthday, and I was telling people I went to a Greek restaurant, and our friend Mark, who lives in our back house, joined us, and he was homeless for 8 years, living on the street, and now he's part of our family. So I'm grateful for the friendships that I've had with people who've been experiencing homelessness, and there are many of them remarkable people. All of them people worthy of being housed, and certainly that's what I want to share today. I want to share about the myths about affordable housing and supportive housing, and then solutions at work. But before I do, I want to give a little reflection about Mother's Day and homelessness. So I'm going to share this screen. So this week, Jill and I are celebrating Mother's Day with my almost 93-year-old mother-in-law, who is currently in assisted living, bedridden with late-stage Alzheimer's, but still full of love. When I visit her, she's unable to speak coherently, but she laughs when I sing to her, dancing cheek to cheek. I love visiting my mother-in-law in a beautiful facility where she's loved by her caregivers. My mother-in-law was able to afford her assisted living because she was able to purchase a home near Pismo Beach when it was affordable, and it was sold to pay for her care. Not every elderly person is so fortunate, however. Some end up living on the streets. There are people in their 80s and 70s and even 90s living on the streets of Pasadena. I am one of the fortunate elderly people. I celebrated my 74th birthday this week, and when I met Jill's mom and sister 12 years ago, I shared with them Julia Ward Howe's Mother's Day Proclamation, a radically pacifist call to action published in, this is it. Published in 1870, and most of you know this. She was a well-known abolitionist and called on mothers around the world to form an international gathering to end war. This might have seemed like a strange thing for me to share when I first met my mother-in-law, but I met Jill at the Palm Sunday Peace Parade, which was led by our mutual friend Bert Newton, who's now an organizer for our organization. And I wanted my future family to know that I'm a Quaker pacifist. Jill and I know from personal experience, let me see. Yeah, fortunately, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law appreciated my peace-loving ways, and I love them both dearly for that and much, much more. When I turned 74 this week, I'm very grateful that God has led me to work for peace and to address poverty by advocating for affordable housing. This challenging but beautiful work and my marriage to Jill keeps me feeling young, except when my back is acting up. I'm grateful for having a mother who has had a soft spot for those in need, and I want to send out a shout out to mothers everywhere. There is no calling more crucial, more worthy of honor than being a mother. But sad to say, many mothers are at risk of becoming homeless, and 1/3 of California's unhoused population are women, and many of them are mothers. And this is according to the HUD definition of homelessness. And it doesn't count those who are couch surfing or doubled up or tripled up in apartments. Their children are considered homeless according to the McKinney-Vento Assistance Act. In Pasadena, 700 school children are considered homeless. 10 million Americans are currently at risk of eviction. More often than not, they are mothers. Having children is the single greatest predictor of whether someone will face eviction. So I just wanted to share all of that to put into context what I'm going to share next. I want to share with you two videos. One of them is by Teresa Eilers, who worked for Everyone In, which was a campaign to educate people about homelessness and supportive housing. And she helped to organize many events, including homeless to house bus tours that we did in Pasadena back before COVID. And we're going to have another affordable housing bus tour this summer. And I want to share this video because Teresa dispels a lot of the myths about affordable housing. And it's unbelievable sometimes what people will do to oppose it. There's a project in San Dimas for supportive housing for people who are elderly, seniors, and 3,000 people showed up at the park to oppose it. They were terrified that there might be homeless people living in supportive housing near their community. So that's why we made this educational video, which I will share with you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I am passionate about organizing, and specifically around organizing with housing and homelessness, because I think we know what the causes are of homelessness. We know what the solutions are. And I think it's a really beautiful thing when we can get people from across the political spectrum, have dialogue amongst each other, and really talk talk through those challenging questions and then find something tangible to work on together, because we all ultimately want to make this place, or make the world, a better place for ourselves, for our families, for our neighbors. And organizing is a great way to do it, and you get to see real results. So hopefully from this video, we'll be able to get some more of you organizing. And so I want to talk about the myths and the facts about affordable housing and homelessness, bring some folks down to reality if they're not there already. And myth number one that is a misconception is that affordable housing drives down property values. The fact of the matter is, absolutely not. Affordable housing has no negative impact on property values. Research shows this consistently, that affordable housing has no impact on the next door neighbors of that affordable housing development, on the school systems, on the property values anywhere within the city. Affordable housing is built at extremely high standards. It's very attractive. We'll look at some pictures later on, but just to reiterate one more time, affordable housing has zero impact on property values. Myth number two, affordable housing looks cheap and undesirable. I'm sure you've heard that before. And again, the reality of the situation is that affordable housing is modern, it's attractive, it's beautiful. Affordable housing developers actually have to comply with with more restrictions on design and construction standards as their market rate counterparts. And so when you see that affordable housing is affordable, it's not because it costs any less money to create it. It's actually, it's lovely. And I'm going to show you some pictures right now of two affordable housing developments. This is Marv's Place in Pasadena. It houses 20 formerly homeless families, and Marv's Place actually won a design award. It is that lovely, and I'm sure you would all agree with me that anybody would love to live in Marv's Place. I would love to live here. It is designed to scale. It is modest in scale. It does not overpower any of its other neighbors. You have some lovely landscaping, lovely architectural design. And this is consistent in all affordable housing developments. Here is another development in the San Gabriel Valley in the city of El Monte. This is 41 units of housing for formerly homeless veterans. And again, you can see that it is modest in scale, maximum 3 floors of housing and many units. They have their own balcony. There's lovely gardening. Since there's veterans, they proudly wave the American flag out in front. And this is something that anybody would feel proud to live in, and also proud to have right next door to their home and in their community. Myth number 3, affordable housing is a financial burden on municipalities. And no, this is the furthest thing from the truth. Actually, affordable housing, it is cheaper to place someone into affordable housing and housing in general than to leave them on the street. And so think about this reality. When someone is living on the street and they're experiencing chronic homelessness, well, taxpayers have to pay for emergency room visits. Taxpayers have to pay for law enforcement patrols. They have to pay for law enforcement arrests. They have to pay for sanitation services, cleaning sidewalks, providing hand washing stations, providing porta potties, other types of social services. And the experts who have crunched the numbers, they say that someone who is experiencing chronic homelessness and living on the streets actually costs a taxpayer $35,000. And then we've been able to see that it is anywhere from 40 to 50% cheaper to put someone in housing. And so you wonder, well, where does the funding for affordable housing come from? It often comes from the state, comes from the federal government, and it comes from something called tax credits. Here in the city of Pasadena, Pasadena does not spend any money from the general fund on affordable housing. And something else that's specific to Pasadena is we have our inclusionary housing ordinance, which accrues inclusionary housing fees that developers pay and help build affordable housing. Something else that's fantastic about affordable housing and finances here in Pasadena is we have something called the 20-20-20 rule. This means that 20% of labor has to be sourced here in Pasadena. 20% of contractors have to be sourced here in Pasadena, and 20% of materials must be sourced here in Pasadena. And this brings millions of dollars of investment into our city. I personally think this is the most important myth to bust. Moving on to our fourth and final myth. Affordable housing brings increased crime. And again, no, this is far away from the truth. Affordable housing is safe and improves the community. No studies show that affordable housing brings crime. In fact, we see that affordable housing creates safer communities. It creates family stability. Families, they thrive when they get to stay in their own home and cultivate their own community relationships. And on top of that, if it's family housing, then the children get to go to local public schools and help generate revenue for the city. And so housing low-income and homeless folks actually makes communities better and safer. Thank you so much for letting me join your event. I really appreciate it. Feel free to check out our website, everyoneinla.org, to learn more about our work.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yep,
Great.
that was great.
So that video, by the way, was made by Morgan Tucker, who used to work for ICUJP, and you'll see another video by her. Before I go on to the second video, do you have any questions about some of these myths that we were busting, or do you have any questions about affordable housing?
That some of the info was specific to Pasadena and Pasadena laws. Do you know how that plays out in like the city of LA? Is there anything that you know?
Well, I think it's a lot of the things are similar. I mean, I think we have some really excellent policies because we have we have an outstanding housing department, and we've really worked on these policies. So for example, the 20-20-20 requirement is, I think, unique in Pasadena, but it's legal. It could be anywhere. So we kind of see ourselves in Pasadena as a model for other cities. Inclusionary, as I'll talk about later, is great. 20% of all new construction must have 20% of, whenever there's 10 or more units in a development, 20% have to be set aside as affordable in our city. So that's created about 1,000 units of affordable housing since this ordinance was passed at no cost to the city. And because we give density bonuses and stuff, it actually it benefits the developers as well. So there's a lot of things that we do here in our city that we'd like other cities to replicate. And that's why we're having the affordable housing bus tour. So one way we dispel myths is through educational work like this and showing people examples of affordable housing and so forth. But another thing we do is share stories. So I want to share the story of a dear friend, Cynthia Kirby, who was, she was homeless for 10 years on the streets of Pasadena, and then became housed, and her life has been transformed. She's now working full-time for the Baptist Church in our city. And I want to share with you her story, which is an amazing one. So let me get that up. Okay.
Hello, my name name is Morgan Tucker, and I work for Making Housing and Community Happen. MHCH is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and empowering congregations for housing justice. I'm so pleased to introduce Cynthia Kirby to you today. Cynthia is a valued member of the MHCH community, and she serves on Union Station's Lived Experience Advisory Panel. Cynthia is here to share her inspiring story with us today.
My name is Cynthia Kirby. I'm 49 years old, a wife, and a mother to an amazingly strong 19-year-old daughter. I was placed on permanent disability at age 28 and went from making $60,000 a year to less than $1,000 per month. The strain of my disability ended my first marriage. My parents provided some support until I wound up in an abusive relationship that brought with it criminal elements and crystal meth. I spent the next decade in and out of homelessness, struggling with my addiction and domestic violence. I slept in my car, stayed in abandoned houses, or moved from motel to motel. The night I turned 40, I spent in a grocery store parking lot, afraid to fall asleep. I had just met my current husband, relapsed after 8 years in recovery. I'd also been in recovery, but I had struggled with the program's spiritual emphasis. I was curious about how he'd come to believe, and he shared the Word of God with me. But life seemed hopeless, so I leveled an ultimatum at whatever higher power might exist. It had 1 year to convince me to continue living. In that year, even though my mom died, my husband was incarcerated, and I waited for him desperately alone on the streets of Pasadena, God wooed me, building the foundation of my relationship with him. At the 1 year mark, my husband was released from jail, and I took it as a sign that God listened. We wanted to get married and find housing, but we had few options on disability income. God used connections we had made on the street and in recovery to help us achieve stability. My husband was accepted into Union Station Homeless Services Adult Center. 3 months later, we were married, and I was invited into the program. We received a housing voucher, which included permanent supportive services, people helping us to rebuild our lives, though it took nearly a year to find an apartment because of the affordable housing crisis. Today, I'm a member of Union Station's Lived Experience Advisory Panel, work part-time at my church, First Baptist Church, Pasadena, and am the director of our children's choir. I have more than 8 years of sobriety. I'm a student at PCC and have nearly a 4.0 GPA. Gratitude for a life I never thought I would have, and my amazingly intimate relationship with God carry me. When I heard about Jill Shook and her work in Pasadena, I attended a housing justice workshop, became a member of Making Housing and Community Happen, and served as their liaison with my church. It has been a blessing to advocate for permanent housing solutions, to be a part of direct democracy, to realize that my voice is powerful. Working with Jill, I've been to city council meetings, had one-on-one meetings with council members, spoken with the mayor, and who am I? Can I do this? I'm a citizen and a community member, and my voice matters. The advocacy, prayer vigils, and sleep outs by Heritage Square led to its approval, and now it's being built. The work they do works. Everyone should support the pioneering work of Making Housing and Community Happen, to equip faith communities to be the church, be the hands that feed. Please join us in building a better community.
Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing your powerful story. We at MHCH would like to invite you to support our housing justice work. To do so,
I'm going to stop there with the fundraising pitch, but I think you can see how powerful it is to have people who had lived experience share their stories. And Union Station has trained people to do this effectively, and so do we. And it's powerful when people like Cynthia go to council meetings. Just this past 2 weeks, we had an issue come up at the Planning Commission. We wanted the city to make safe parking a permitted use for churches. We have a safe parking program, and it isn't technically legal because it's not a permitted use for churches. So we went to the Planning Commission with 3 of the safe parkers and the pastor of that church. And the planning department had not indicated in their report that safe parking should be a permitted use for churches, only for metro stops. So, but when one of our safe parkers, Suzanne Lee, shared her story, it touched the hearts of the commissioners. She was raised in San Marino. She'd gone to college. She was a paralegal. Then she had a son who was a prominent lawyer but wouldn't take care of her. When she got sick, she used up all her savings. She ended up couch surfing and then eventually lived in her vehicle. She's my age, 73 years old, and she told this story and how the safe parking program has been helping her, and they're trying to get her housed. And the commissioners decided to make safe parking a permitted use for churches in our city, for religious institutions. So it's always inspiring to me to see people like Cynthia, Suzanne, and others realize that they have power, that they have a voice, that they can make a difference. And when you want to persuade people who are frightened about the homeless, there's probably no more effective way than to invite some of those people to a meeting and have them share their stories and help people to realize that unhoused people are people like us. And so they're not to be feared, but to be appreciated. Any questions? Okay. Well, I want to move on to share with you some of the amazing affordable housing projects just in our city. I want to preface this by saying, when we go to city council in Pasadena, we're always telling our city council members, we want you to do more. But actually, when we talk to people outside of Pasadena, we tell them what a wonderful city we have and how much we've accomplished. And both is true. I mean, we did lower our homeless count in Pasadena from 1,100 to 500 over a period of 10 years. And that's amazing. There aren't too many other cities that have lowered their homeless count by 56%. But the way we look at it is 500 people are 500 too many. And we're not going to be satisfied until there is functional zero homelessness in our city. And I don't think any city should be satisfied to have any homeless people living on their streets. But nonetheless, we can take pride in what's been accomplished because it shows that we can, in fact, make a difference. So I'm going to share this PowerPoint, the rest of it, and show you some examples of what we've been doing. So in this presentation, I'm going to show you different kinds of affordable housing types and the population that they serve and what makes affordable housing happen and some of the obstacles to making it happen. So we're going to start with probably the most important thing we need to realize is that advocacy is needed because the state requires that cities plan for affordable housing, but they aren't required to actually build it. So every city, every 8 years, has to have what's called a housing element. And they have to show in the housing element that it's possible to build affordable housing sufficient to meet the needs of that city, but they don't actually have to do it. So the way it gets done is through advocacy. And our faith-rooted approach has influenced local decision makers and led to hundreds of units of affordable housing being built in Pasadena and beyond. So let me give you an example. This is a vacant lot that was vacant for decades, was purchased with HUD money here in Pasadena. And for political reasons, it was vacant and left vacant. And then City Council member Kennedy brought it up for discussion, and the community was very excited about having affordable housing built there, but there was some opposition from council members. So we had a 9-month campaign. We had prayer vigils. We went to city council and met with all of them. We showed up at all the meetings, and some of us, including me, slept overnight at the site to dramatize the situation. And after 9 months, we wore them down, and they approved this project, which is in the process of being built. It'll be completed by the end of this year. 69 units of supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. It's going to be a beautiful project, and we're really excited that it's going to be completed this year. Here's another vacant lot right next to City Hall. For decades, it was just empty, not even a parking lot, just a weeds-infested vacant lot. And again, we had another campaign right next to City Hall. We had vigils every Monday. We called them Moral Monday vigils. We met with elected officials. We spoke at council meetings. And again, we use the power of the religious community. We have a lot of churches in our city, and we mobilized religious leaders, not only Christian, but Muslim and Jewish leaders, to come and speak. And eventually the city council agreed to use this lot for an amazing project. You can see a design for it. It's going to be right next to City Hall, 5 stories. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be 98 units of support of affordable housing, with 10% of the units set aside for people experiencing homelessness. So this is going to be right in the heart of our Civic Center. And right next to it, by the way, is Centennial Place, which I'll talk about later, but that's permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. So in many cities, affordable housing is kind of tucked away out of sight, but I'm proud to say in Pasadena, we're going to have affordable housing right in the heart of our city, which I think makes a very strong moral statement, and I hope will influence other cities to do likewise. So we're really excited about this project that's coming up this summer. It's going to open up 65 units of supportive housing. Supportive housing means that people who are chronically homeless will not only be giving housing, but also the services they need to thrive. So if they need job counseling or drug treatment counseling or whatever, they will be provided with that. And the way this project got started was Salvation Army had some land that could use, and they were going to build a state-of-the-art food bank. But they met with our housing director, who's amazing, and he said, you know, you have development potential here. You could build affordable housing on this site, and we could get the funding for you through tax credits and state and local and state and federal funds. So our housing director helped them, and they decided to do it. And now this summer it's going to open up, and we'll have, actually, when you combine this project with Heritage Square South, the one I just mentioned, there'll be 130 units of supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness opening up in our city this year. So here's Marv's Place. You've already heard about that. 19 formerly homeless families are living there. This is Centennial Place. This used to be the YMCA, built in 1919, and now it houses 144 homeless individuals. Another kind of housing is for people with special needs. This is the Mark. It's managed by Caring Housing Ministries, and they provide services for people with severe mental illness. And again, it's a beautiful, home that doesn't stand out in the neighborhood. Looks like any other private home, but it serves a community with special needs. Senior affordable housing is very important. The fastest growing segment of the unhoused population are seniors. And that's because seniors are on fixed incomes. They often have health issues that use up their savings, and they find themselves on the street. And I think it's unconscionable that we have people in their 70s and 80s and 90s living on the street, but that's the reality in our society. And I was mentioning that in San Dimas that 3,000 people showed up to oppose senior housing. It just boggles my mind to think that people would oppose having elderly people who are living on the street be housed near them, as if that was some kind of horrible thing. They should be proud that their community is providing this service for seniors. So here's an example that this is Heritage Square North. This is just north of this place that's going to open up this year. It's a beautiful development. I've been to some of these apartments, and they're really lovely, and they house people who are very low income seniors. This was a large project built many years ago, and it was going to revert to market rate, which happens after like 50 years with affordable housing. But it was preserved by a group called the Retirement Housing Foundation, and they purchased it. And now they have a 55-year covenant renewed, and that's going to provide housing for a great many seniors. And then another thing that we do in Pasadena that's a bit unusual is affordable home ownership. And there's been a big push in our city for this because home ownership is what creates generational wealth. It helps people to, pass on from one generation to another their equity, and it also stabilizes the community, long-term home ownership. So this is a project with 44 units of. Now, affordable means that these would be selling in the range of like $350,000 to $400,000. So people who are making $70,000, $80,000 a year could afford these. And here's another example of affordable home ownership. By the way, this property was built on a liquor store that was very unsightly, and the neighbors didn't like it, and it was torn down, and this was built in its place. There's another affordable home ownership project that was built on what had been a gas station that was defunct, and now it's a beautiful apartment building, and there's going to be businesses on the first floor, and then 48 units, yeah, and half of them for low income, another 25% for people who are moderate income, and then the rest are market rate. And that's how they can make it affordable. And they also get tax credits and other funding, including $10 million from the city's inclusionary fees. So this is opening up, or has opened up, and it's another example of housing for this income group. Then affordable family housing. We talked about Marv's Place, but here's a 38-unit development on East Orange Grove Boulevard called the Groves, Orange Grove Gardens. And it's beautiful, and it houses families. And Abode Communities was the developer for this. This is another example of affordable family housing developed. By the way, affordable is a little different from supportive. Supportive is for people who are chronically homeless living on the street. Affordable means people who are low income. And the way affordability is defined is that you pay no more than 30% of your income on rent. So if you're making $60,000 a year, your rent for the year would be $20,000. And that would be considered affordable. So here's another example of affordable housing. This is a faith-based model, and it was purchased with some HUD dollars, and it's called Agape Court, and churches have gotten started in this. It's a beautiful facility. It has a swimming pool and community room, and this is how my wife Jill got started with her interest in affordable housing. She started a tutoring program, and she found that many of the kids, even despite all the good tutoring they got, were not doing well in school. But when they were moved into affordable housing, they did well because their parents were paying 1/3 of their income for rent, so they didn't have to have 2 or 3 jobs to pay the rent. They weren't doubled up in apartments the way many families are in our city who are low income. Instead, the kids had a room of their own where they could study, and so they thrived and they went on to college. Something I never learned when I got my master's in education, that housing was an important factor in the success, the academic success of students. This is Kings Village. It's an old model, not one that we use very much anymore. There's 314 units were built for low-income housing, and it was not doing really well. It wasn't well maintained, and it was purchased by a church through Jean Birch, Pastor Jean Birch of the Community Bible Church, and she managed to get federal and state funding to rehabilitate the place, and now it's a good place with over 200 units of affordable housing. Another way that we get affordable housing in Pasadena is through the inclusionary ordinance. I mentioned that earlier. All new developments, 10 units or more, have to set aside 20% as affordable. And they have a choice, however. They could either build on or off-site those extra units, or they can pay an in lieu fee. Instead of building the units, they pay that fee, or they can provide a land donation. Most developers build on site, but some pay the fee, and that fee has been used to build supportive housing. And over 1,000 units of affordable housing have been built in Pasadena through the inclusionary ordinance. And the beauty of the inclusionary is that it's scattered throughout the city. So it's not in one area of the city, a low-income area of the city, for example, but it would be in high-end neighborhoods where they have deluxe apartments. For example, Westgate is right in the heart of downtown Pasadena, a very high-end area, but they set aside 20% of their apartments as affordable. And now, thanks to another program, our housing department was able to have all of the units in Westgate that are not for low income be for moderate income. So what had started off as a luxury apartment building with 20% affordable units for low income now is moderate and low income. It's an interesting program that our housing department got wind of, and so this is a real asset to our city. Our city is concerned about what they call missing middle, people who are earning between $90,000 and $110,000 a year. This group, often they're teachers and city workers, can't find housing in our city, so this kind of project helps them. So there's something called scattered site affordable housing using Section 8 vouchers. Section 8 vouchers ensure that people don't pay any more than 1/3 of their income, and then the government pays the other 2/3. So there are about 1,400 voucher holders in Pasadena, and there are about 20,000 people who are on the waiting list for these vouchers. they're very hard to come by. But it's a great program. I think just like we have food stamps available to everybody who income qualifies, I think we should have housing vouchers for everyone who qualifies. But that's so far not the case. In addition to affordable housing that has an affordability covenant, and by the way, all of the things that you've seen have what's called an affordability covenant. So when they're built, the developer signs an agreement that the units will be rented at such and such a affordability rate for at least 55 years. And so there are other affordable housing which is not covenanted. They just happen to be affordable, sort of naturally occurring. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that this kind of naturally occurring affordable housing can be purchased to keep it permanently affordable. And then something very near and dear to our hearts is building affordable housing on underutilized religious land. This is something that MHCH is very actively involved with. Many churches have dwindling congregations and huge parking lots and campuses, and they're struggling to maintain these facilities. One way to do that is to use their underutilized land for affordable housing, and that both benefits the church and the community. So here's 53 units of senior housing in Marin County on the former site of a Lutheran church. Churches don't necessarily have to tear down their sanctuary. In Laguna Beach, we have a church that worked with us that had a huge sanctuary and a small congregation, and they were struggling and didn't know what to do. And we advised them to build 85 units of affordable housing. We actually offered a range of options to them, and the one they chose was to tear down their sanctuary and have it rebuilt at a size that was appropriate for their needs. And that enabled them to have 85 units of affordable housing and a steady income source because the land in Laguna Beach was so valuable. And so we're really excited about that project, and it'll be opening up in a couple of years. It takes a while for these things to actually get from the drawing board to the construction phase, but that's the kind of thing which we're trying to do, is not have churches just get rid of their church, but to thrive. Here's another project that the Methodists did in Orange County, the Wesley Village. And this is a project that was done on underutilized church land, and it has a range of services. And this is not unusual with these affordable housing projects. They not only provide a roof over people's heads, but Head Start program, counseling, tutoring, all kinds of things happen in these kinds of affordable housing projects. And here's a design for a project at an Episcopal church site in Riverside, and another one in Garden Grove, UMC, and then here in Hayward, California, they're using tiny homes on a church site, on a Presbyterian parking lot. And here's another transitional supportive services for women and children in San Bernardino on the site of an old Catholic convent. Another model is manufactured homes. I've been to this Star Apartments in LA, and it was all modular. And it's kind of fun to see it. It's very unusual architectural design. Again, kind of running against the stereotype that affordable housing is kind of boring, not easy on the eyes, but some of it, like this one, is very interesting architecturally, and it's an interesting model. There's 102 micro units in the Star Apartments. And another thing that we're very interested in is affordable housing on school district land. Unfortunately, like churches, schools, especially public schools, are seeing dwindling enrollment. The enrollment in public schools in Pasadena is 50% less than what it used to be. So there's a lot of underutilized campuses in Pasadena, and people don't want to sell off this land, this church school land. So another option is to build affordable housing on it, particularly workforce housing for teachers and staff. Teachers are pretty low income. In our city, the starting salary for a teacher is $56,000. The average teacher makes about $65,000 a year. You can't afford an apartment in Pasadena when that's how much you're earning. So, so teachers have to commute long distances to teach. But if schools use their underutilized campuses for workforce housing, it can really benefit the teachers and the community. So this is, there's been some new state bills that make it easier for schools to build workforce housing. They can get tax credits now, earmarked for teachers, and earmarked apartments for teachers and staff. By the way, I mentioned that teachers make a really low salary. The staff, the cafeteria workers and security and all of that, they're making like $35,000 a year. It's ridiculous. So they really need affordable housing. And this is beginning to happen, again, sometimes with great opposition from NIMBYs, from neighbors who don't want affordable housing, even in school campuses near them. Another model that has become increasingly popular is motel conversions. Building affordable housing from scratch can be very expensive, sometimes up to $800,000 per unit. Now, the reason that it's so expensive is that affordable housing receives tax credits and state funds, and so they have to pay prevailing wage, which is comparable to union wage, sometimes more. And market rate developers can pay people minimum wage or barely, but so they can build more cheaply. Also, affordable housing has to meet high environmental standards in order to get the tax credits. So when you factor in the cost of having high environmental standards and high labor costs, that's why affordable housing can be 20% more expensive to build than market rate. So people are looking to motel conversions as another option. It's a little cheaper and it doesn't necessitate new construction. So Governor Newsom and the Sacramento passed a bill called Project Home Key, and it allows governments to purchase hotels, motels for homeless housing. And this has created 12,000 units of affordable housing since 2020. So it's a great opportunity. Although again, and here's a good example of a place in Sacramento. They're converting this hotel, and it will provide housing for 200 people. And we passed about 4 years ago an ordinance in Pasadena that made it easier to convert motels into supportive housing, but it was discretionary, not by right. So that means that any conversion of a motel to affordable housing had to go through a public engagement process. And the proposal to convert a Ramada Inn to supportive housing near a school 4 years ago in Pasadena turned into a nightmare. Public engagement wasn't handled well, the neighbors pushed back, and they won. And it's a great example on how not to do motel conversion. I was at a meeting where over 300 people showed up, and they were just outraged that this motel, which was across the street from a school, was going to have unhoused seniors or unhoused people living in it. And I've never seen any people so angry as this group. It was like a mob. They were just screaming at the city council members. And that's what's happening right now in San Dimas. So public engagement is really important, and making sure the community understands some of the realities that we've talked about with respect to affordable housing. So this is what we encountered in Pasadena when this motel came up for consideration. Okay, so one of the ways we're going to try to help people to appreciate affordable housing is to have this bus tour July 15th. We're going to tour 10 affordable housing sites, some of which you've seen, most of them you've seen. And then we're going to help people to learn how affordable housing benefits communities, transforms lives of residents. And our goal is to change the hearts and minds of city officials, community leaders, and influencers to become champions of affordable housing. And we're going to do that by targeting all the elected officials we can in the San Gabriel Valley. They're all going to get invitations. When we had the Homeless to House bus tours, I'm going to close this down. When we had Homeless to House bus tours pre-COVID, we had mayors and city council members from the San Gabriel Valley join us in our tours, and some of them became champions of affordable housing. They were so impressed by what they saw in Pasadena and Eagle Rock. So that's our goal this summer. We're going to have a 57-person tour bus, and we're going to go around the city and show people what you've seen in the slideshow. And then we're going to have people with lived experience like Cynthia tell their stories. And at the end, we're going to have the housing director meet with people who are interested, and he'll explain how particularly religious institutions can use their underutilized land for affordable housing, like the Salvation Army did. And we'll have our Congregational Land Committee also be there to encourage people of faith to be good stewards of their property. So that's my presentation. That's the work we're doing to dispel myths and to provide some solutions that work. Anybody have questions? Yeah, Mike.
How many of the projects in Pasadena are government owned and operated? Is it the majority or the minority or what?
None of them.
None of them.
No,
Okay.
no. Public housing owned by the government is a model that was abandoned decades ago. You've probably seen some of the pictures of some of those failed projects that had to be torn down. They are a failed model. They don't do that anymore. What they do is they have a private-public partnership. So what happens is when a suitable site is found, usually a nonprofit affordable housing developer will acquire the property and then have to go out and find funding for it. And it's a very complicated process, but they can get something called tax credits. They can get other funding sources and sometimes private money as well. And then sometimes, usually the city will kick in some funding, usually about 5 to 10% of the cost of construction. But the project is owned by the affordable housing developer, who signs a covenant, promising to abide by the affordability rules. So there's no publicly owned affordable housing in our city, and very little in other cities. And they have it just from the old days. Some of them still remain from decades ago, but there's no new publicly owned affordable housing that's been built.
I had a thought that the city could donate or lease or lend vacant properties that the city owns to developers.
Yes.
Does that happen?
Yeah, correct. The city owns the land. They lease it for like 50 years to a developer. So the city owns the land, but the developer will own and maintain the property. The cities don't want to have the responsibility of maintaining an affordable housing project. Similarly, churches, we encourage to do the same thing. It's called a capitalized ground lease. So the church will cut a deal with the developer where the church will lease the land for 50 years and then get all the money up front for that 50 years from the developer. So whatever the payment to lease the land would be over that time, they would receive and be able to build a new sanctuary or maintain their facility.
Well,
We never, yeah, go ahead.
I assume that the lease is a bargain basement lease, that the city's not getting a lot of money for it.
Typically, the cities don't get a lot of money for it because of the public benefits.
Yeah.
But with churches, they have valuable property, and so we do encourage churches to get a fair return on their investment. So, but still, it's cheaper for the affordable housing developer to have that kind of deal with a church than to go out and buy the land on the open market.
Thank you.
Okay. Rose, you got a question?
Oh, sorry, Christian comment, really. Thank you so much. That was just great. First thing I want to say. Unfortunately, LA is so big and we're so bogged down that all the things you're talking about, I'm trying to visualize that. If we were kind of the community that I work with, say, we could maybe achieve the same things because, in a small community, but in LA, it's like, I don't know, it's like the boy with the dike. I mean, every time you think you put your hole in the dike, more things happen, which is very sad. I just wanted to talk briefly just about the metro project, though, that's kind of like interesting, kind of different to yours. There's a subway station, North Hollywood, which is going to be an interlink between buses to Pasadena, the orange line that goes across the valley, and the end of the red line. They're trying to make it into a big hub. They're developing the whole area to be kind of like fairly trendy. I know NoHo is quite trendy anyway, but much more so. And part of it is developing a housing project. And some people I know have been fighting for that to go up to being 15% affordable housing. And they've been in many meetings, have been going on for months and months and months. And basically, it's just so hard. I mean, it really is. I don't want to bore everybody with the whole story. I'll tell you separately, Anthony, possibly. But anyway, I just wanted basically to say thank you. That's great. And I'm going to, when this is online, I'm going to share this video with quite a few people.
Right. I want to say that with inclusionary, you have to be careful. And we in Pasadena did a nexus study to make sure that we got the right percentage. If the percentage is too high, developers are not going to build.
Mm-hmm.
And some cities want that. That's why the state says that in order to have inclusionary, you have to do a study to make sure that you've chosen a percentage that's not going to impede development. And so that's a sweet spot. And we figured out in Pasadena that 20% was a good number because we have a very hot real estate market.
Right.
So it's important for every community to look at that. What is the best percentage? I think every city should have an inclusionary ordinance, at least, yeah. I mean, it just makes so much sense. Why build luxury apartments and not set aside a percentage for people who are low income? It seems a no-brainer to me, but I don't think there's an inclusionary ordinance in LA. And there should be.
There is, but it can be kind of, you can spend money on something else to kind of get out of it, basically.
Yeah.
One of those.
Well, that's the in lieu fee. And
Yeah.
that's, if the in lieu fee is too low, then a lot of developers opt for that. So we raised our in lieu fee and fewer developers took advantage of it. They're now building on site. Rick, what about you? What's your question?
No, there was a great presentation, and it was really good to get a really deep dive into what you're doing with the organization and how you see these obstacles and how you've been able to negotiate them. And I was wondering, with a lot of cities in Southern California, places like Pasadena, Glendale, they have had a reputation of, in real estate at least, of being places that are exclusionary and discriminatory going back to the 40s and 50s. Have you, I know that there are, like with Pasadena, you've gotten to have a really good rapport with folks in the city council and the city overall. But Pasadena does have a history of being a sunset town, where if you were a person of color after sunset, you were not expected to be there. There were in rent control or in leases, there were actually provisions where a person selling could not sell to somebody that was of color. Have you been you probably have not had to use this tool, but have you been able to relay part of that history and maybe talk about to the city council and other people about how this is a really good way to repair that history and to get something else going in the city?
Well, that's a really good question, and I want to just make one slight correction to what you said. Pasadena was never a sundown city. Glendale was.
Yeah.
But Pasadena's always had a significant population of African Americans and Latinos, always. And they played a really important role in our city. But you're absolutely right. Pasadena had racial covenants. In fact, they were covenants that many homes had that said no one who was not an Anglo-Saxon Protestant could buy the home. In other words, it excluded Jews and Catholics as well as Blacks. So we have that racial history, and we are very aware of it, and it's very much a part of our work. We had a prayer vigil in a Black church in our neighborhood 2 years ago, where we had 70 community leaders and religious leaders kind of do a liturgy of repentance and commitment. We talked about all the racial history of Pasadena, and we repented of it, and we committed to rectifying it. So one way we're doing that is that there was a something called a 710 stub. It was the idea was to extend the 710 freeway, and they basically tore down a largely African-American part of our city and displaced a lot of people of color. And now that stub has been returned to our city. It's like over 50 acres, worth probably close to $1 billion. And we have a committee that's been formed specifically to look at reparations. How do we address the wrongs that were committed against our African-American neighbors in that particular case? And there was also the 210 freeway that went through an African-American neighborhood. So yes, we're very aware of the racial history of our city and how it's linked to the housing issue, and we're very committed to reparations.
Good. And I do have to thank you for correcting me, because I just realized it's South Pasadena that has more of a history of like exclusion and stuff. So I just wanted to say that, so I can still go shopping in Pasadena.
Well, yeah, but Pasadena was like, I'm very familiar because I worked with the African-American community. And back in the 50s, if you were African-American and you wanted to go shopping in downtown, department stores, if you were Black, you had to go in the back door and you couldn't try on the clothes. This was in the 50s in Pasadena, not in Mississippi. Okay. So yeah, Pasadena has a very mixed history. We have a wonderful African-American population and Latino population in our city who've been contributed in amazing ways, but we also have an abysmal, deplorable racial history.
Anthony, first, I just want to applaud the work you and Jill and your organization are doing. I sat here with so much pride and so much satisfaction that we know you from all your work you do with us, and you come on here, but the idea that every day you guys are doing this work with such productive results. And what I loved about your PowerPoint, I'm hoping you're using this in community meetings and in business meetings and elsewhere, is the productivity and the outcomes. So it's extraordinary work, and I can only imagine the details and the planning and the organizing and the lobbying and negotiating with reluctant leaders and other interest groups. So on that level, it's just extraordinary. And please be sure to communicate to Jill and to your colleagues how much we appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes. And in a way, it was slightly preempted because I'm in the midst of reviewing a book, which I'm going to promote and share with everybody, because this is a book where the title says everything when affirmative action was white, and it traces how programs in the 20th century, including the GI Bill and various Social Security and other programs, were infected by racism and were implemented because of the Democratic Southern congressmen and the power they had in Congress to allow for local implementation of the GI Bill, perpetuating Jim Crow and redlining and all the rest. So I'm thrilled, and I almost would encourage you in your PowerPoint to include a section on anti-discrimination provisions, on affirmative action, reparations now, because that has to be built in, not only in the legislation, but in the implementation and in ensuring that all of these programs are conducted with racial justice and racial equality in mind. Finally, to put a question mark on something, how have you dealt with business leaders? How have you made business an ally in much of the kind of work that you're doing?
Great question, and we're need to do more about that. But just to return to something you said, which I want to not correct but clarify, is it wasn't just the Southerners. It wasn't just the Southerners. If you read Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, this was pervasive. I mean, Pasadena and most northern cities did not want to have integrated communities, and they had laws in place locally and statewide that led to segregation. And so, as far as businesses, one of the interesting developments here is the recently our city is coming to terms with the fact that these racial covenants were an integral part of our city. And the mayor of Pasadena in the 1940s, I don't remember his name, was very instrumental. He worked with a law company, Hahn and Hahn, to promote these racial covenants and other things. And so our city council has decided to take his picture down from the wall, the picture of the mayor who promoted these racial injustice. But we were approached, our organization, by Hahn and Hahn, a legal company, they asked us, what can we do to repair the wrongs that we did in the past? So yeah, we do want to work with businesses, and on this issue of racial justice. And we also need to do more work, and we're trying to expand our efforts to make sure that businesses understand that housing our unhoused neighbors is good for business. You know, we don't want to have people living on the sidewalk in front of businesses downtown. It's much better to have them in supportive housing. So yeah, it's good for business, and it's good for I think also good for the city to acknowledge the racial injustices of the past and then to do something about it. Yeah. Carol Francis.
Yes. Amazing Friday morning forum and great work. I was struck when I was walking from the Gold Line station to All Saints that I finally figured out where it is in relation to your city hall, your gorgeous city hall. So it's just east of it. So your housing project, which is next to the city hall, that one, how close is it? Is it even closer or further away to the Gold Line station? Because I know some homeless people are living in their car, but a whole lot of homeless people don't have a car to live in. And being near public transportation would be another plus. So is that considered in terms of good places if they're near transportation centers?
Yeah, it's maybe a 5-minute walk to the Gold Line. So it's and there are buses that go up and down Colorado Boulevard, which is a block away. No, it's an ideal location. I want to say something about our Civic Center, because I come at this from a spiritual perspective. And I think it's interesting to look at the spiritual history of our city as well as the racial history. That Civic Center is a beautiful place, and it was intentionally designed to be that. But it's important to realize how it got started. The first building in that Civic Center was the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, which now is Centennial Place. That was built in 1919. So that was the first building in the Civic Center. Then across from it is the old Julia Morgan YWCA. Mm-hmm. And that was built a couple of years later, designed by the famed architect Julia Morgan, who designed Hearst Castle. And she did a lot of YWCAs. She was a very prolific architect, but one of the greatest architects of the 20th century. So that's a historical site that needs to be restored. And that was where we're going to have affordable housing, but it turned out to be cost prohibitive because of the restoration costs. But those two buildings were the first. Then the Baptist Church was built in 1923. So we have these three religious institutions. And then the City Hall was built. And so when we were making the case for using this land for affordable housing, we were saying that this area is kind of the moral and the spiritual center of our city. And a lot of people were putting an emphasis on the aesthetics. You know, this was the City Beautiful movement, and they wanted to have beautiful designed buildings, and I think that's great. But I was saying we should also concern ourselves not just with aesthetics, but with ethics. How are these buildings reflecting our moral values as a city? And that was the case we kept making for building affordable housing on that underutilized site. But I'm very proud of our city for having that kind of spiritual and moral center, because I think when people come to our city hall and they see this magnificent sort of over the top building, it's more than just aesthetics. There's a moral element to all of this, and that's what we want to emphasize.
As I mentioned, that this was a really great presentation, and as I edit the video, I think it's going to work out really well because of the material that you've been able to share and the slides and everything. So, and I want to make sure that we repost this on the social media sites as things happen. Like if there's a certain city council meeting that you want to bring attention to and have people voice their opinions on, to be able to do to take advantage of our social media to bring attention to it. So that'd be great.
Okay. And I'll be happy also to let you know about bills that are coming up that are important. For example, SB 4 is a bill that we strongly support. We'd like your support for. This is a bill that would rezone all religious land and public college land statewide for affordable housing. And one of the problems we're running into in many instances is that church land isn't zoned for affordable housing. And then we have to go through a whole process of getting a conditional use permit, and that can take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that scares off developers. But this bill, SB 4, would rezone all church land statewide, and it would make affordable housing by right on church land, which would be a huge asset. So we would love the support of ICUJP for SB 4. Another bill that's coming up is SB 567, which would also, this has to do with renter protection, so that landlords can't demolish buildings and displace tenants without protecting their rights and providing them with compensation and the opportunity to return to the apartment building. If apartment building is being torn down to build affordable housing or to build market rate housing, then the developer, well, particularly affordable housing, then the developer has to provide compensation so that those displaced can live somewhere and have the opportunity to return to the place from which they were displaced. So this is a really good bill, SB 567, and I'd be happy to share with you other bills that are in the works that would really benefit tenants and low-income residents. And I want to say our organization is committed to is committed to helping tenants as well as people who are low income. And sometimes there's can be a conflict because sometimes developers want to tear down affordable housing to build more up-to-date affordable housing and displace the people, and we don't support that idea. We want to make sure that anyone who's been displaced is compensated and provided with an affordable place as an alternative.
If it's 1266, it's Donna Buell.
Oh,
Hi.
Donna, hi.
Hi, Anthony. This is so inspiring and so amazing. But I have a question that it's always with me is once you get people all merged together in a housing area, how do the classes get along? How do all the people living there together from various socioeconomic classes, are there any struggles or are there any solutions needed to make it one happy housing place?
Well, that's a really good question. And certainly when it comes to inclusionary, we haven't had any problems. People with inclusionary, 20% is set aside for low and very low income people living with those who are wealthier. Nobody ever knows. There's it's one of those things that hasn't ever been a problem. What generally speaking, affordable housing is on a smaller scale than in the past. I mean, the failed model was to put hundreds and hundreds of people into a big building, and they were kind of segregated, and that's when you had problems. But when you have these smaller scale 60 to 100 unit projects, and you have low income, moderate, all living together, there's no problems. It's a model that's worked really well. Any other questions? Yeah, Steve?
I just want to, on our action items, remind us of the presentation that the ACLU made that they are pursuing legislation to make housing as a human right and to add housing status as a protected grounds in the Unruh Civil Rights Act to prevent discrimination, which currently includes all of the well-known grounds of race, religion, national origin, gender, etc. But this bill would add housing status as a ground for non-discrimination. So when we talk about action items, and of course ICUJP is committed to that, but given today's program, housing as a human right is critical, and it's obviously the kind of work that you're promoting, Anthony.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that presentation, Steve, and I'm very supportive of that idea. It makes it really hard to place people who are experiencing homelessness in motels and things of that sort, because they can just say, well, we don't want people who are unhoused living here. Yeah. So we need to change that. But I think the law that the ACLU is promoting basically applies to public, not to private, at this point. And,
yes, that's right. It's a stepping stone.
It's a stepping stone. Yeah.
No, I don't want to be seen as a NIMBY or anything like that. I support, housing people. My concern is the way it's set up, and just the structure in itself is just still fascist. Only 20%, only 10%. Those standards are way too low for people. If we want to deal with the housing crisis, we have to flip this on its head and say no, 100% and indefinitely, forever in perpetuity. So currently in the federal government, we need to pass some type of resolution that says if you're going to get this funding, you can't have a sunset clause, because we have at a global level, we don't have
I'm not hearing you. I want to hear you, and
I think she got kicked off, maybe. Oh. Yeah.
Well, I just want to respond to what I did hear. I think the system we have is Byzantine and complicated, way too complicated, and hard to scale up. So it's a deeply flawed system, but it's what we've got. I'd like to see more social housing, where the government directly funds projects, kind of the way that Sophia was mentioning. I'd like to see it scaled up so that we don't have big projects like we have in the past, because they didn't work, but we have more projects on a slightly bigger scale and throughout the community, so that they're not concentrated in low-income areas. And all of that requires enormous struggle against basically local prejudice. We're hearing always communities saying we want local control. And that was what people said back in the civil rights era. We don't want outside agitators telling us to integrate our schools and to change our our housing laws. Local control can be a way to prevent much needed affordable housing. On the other hand, it certainly isn't, it isn't right to have affordable housing only in low income areas. And if it displaces people, it's not a good thing. So anyway, we have the system we have, and we have to work to keep reforming it and improving it. And that's what we're all about. But yeah, any other questions?
I just
Mike?
did want to.
Oh, Mike, I saw your hand go up.
I wanted to share a little bit about First Church's experience. The First Church purchased 2 lots next door to the church with the intention of building a parking lot before we came to realize what an important social justice issue housing is. And we partnered with Mercy Housing a Catholic organization, which was incredibly generous to the church. And the result is Carol and Severance Manor, which is a special needs housing in which 85 units are occupied, and in each case, there's at least one person in the unit who is a client of the county's mental health department. And in order to get that building built, they had to cobble together funding from federal, state, local, private, and church foundations. And I assume that's typically the way the financing is put together. And it's just such an incredible jigsaw puzzle that it's a very daunting project.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up, Mike. Jill and I, Jill actually spoke at your church about the theology of affordable housing, and
Yes.
And then we had the opportunity to see that project right next to your church, and your church is really an example for other churches to follow. It's just wonderful what you've done. And what you're saying about the funding is, it is so complex. It can sometimes take like 8 different funding sources in order to get the funding to do affordable housing. That's why, people sometimes criticize affordable housing developers and sort of lump them together with market rate developers. But if you want to make money in an easy way, don't go into affordable housing development. It is incredibly complicated. Not only do you have to go through all that funding issues, but then you have to go into the community and struggle with the NIMBYs. It is unbelievable. That's why, we really want to lift up affordable housing developers. They're doing God's work in the world. And I mean, I'm not saying they're all perfect. Some of them do take advantage of churches. And that's why our organization provides pre-development advice to churches to make sure they get a good deal. But, if even a nonprofit has to be able to pay their staff. So they have to make money to survive. But affordable housing developers don't go into this work to make money primarily. They do it because they have a mission and a commitment. And so that's why I really respect them. And respect churches like yours that do this. Yeah. Okay.
I was just going to relay one short story. There's a Ethiopian Orthodox church and convent that's really close to us. And they've started to do a few things in the community. And one of them is an affordable housing project for some of their, started out with some of the constituents and grown. And they wanted to have kind of like a gathering. So the local park, they had that. And I went out in what constitutes for me formal wear, which is a Dodger jersey. And, me, my wife, you should probably, I said, it's okay. We'll just go there. And so we go out to the park, and there's a few of the folks from the church there, and a couple of them are wearing Dodger jerseys too. And we did the Larry David thing, but it seems like there's more of that happening, not only with religious institutions, but other nonprofits like yourself, where a tearing down the wall between the assumed wall or implied wall between different socioeconomic levels in a community is, to me, I think, is very important, because in realistic terms, a lot of the difference between where people are housed at that point can come down to 1 or 2 issues or major decisions, or maybe bad decisions that you make in your life, and it's kind of like a there but for the grace of God go I type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I see Sophia's hand up, and I know you got cut off, so I
Mhm.
want to hear from you, Sophia, before we close.
Where did I leave off before I got knocked off?
You were talking about how bad the current system is for funding affordable housing. And I think you used the word fascist to describe it, because only 10 or 20% is for affordable housing, and we should have 100%. That's what I heard you say. Is there more you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, just because how are we going to deal with the crisis at 20 and 10%,
Yeah.
and then we want congressional legislation passed to deal with it, because that's how Trump and his dad made his money, so that you don't have a sunset clause and people are not thrown out, and then it goes to market rate. And we don't have a beneficial owner registry. We have multinational corporations laundering money all across the world, and housing is a part of it, because we saw it in the Pandora Papers, and Panama Papers, people that are on terrorist lists. And we don't know who they are, because they'll fund an affordable housing. And we saw this with Eli Bro. We saw it with the schools in Chicago, pushing the charter school movement, then taking over, where the public schools were. That's a land grab. That's a straight out corporate, elitist way of, developers making money at the expense of the public purse. But my concern is, I support housing the homeless. We need it in a conducive way, and not just saying housing units, but we need housing for the mentally challenged and those that are dealing with rehabilitation issues, separate from housing. Because if you don't put someone who's dually diagnosed in a mental ward, why would you do it in a housing unit? And that to me is a form of human rights violations. But my major concern, I put something in the chat. And in Boyle Heights and Lincoln Heights, we're saying, Boyle Heights and Lincoln Heights, we're not Palestine, because we feel that we're being occupied and displaced. And so I put the link of one of the groups that's coming into Lincoln Heights, and just the background of these individuals, And so what do we do when you see they're doubling down on segregation, forcing Black and brown people, poor people to live on top of each other? Why can't Black and brown people live on the West Side? And I'm always going to state, why build when we're in areas that are already, we're sick and we're dying, and they want to keep building where people will get sick and die. So I cannot just blankly support these bills, because these bills will negatively impact our community.
Yeah.
So when you're having your presentation, and amend the laws, amend that bill to exclude these communities, because then I would support a bill like that, because it would, to us, it's just going to destroy us. And right now, if you go to LA County USC, on every floor, you're waiting 200. You're dying because you can't even see the doctor or get an appointment.
Yeah.
So, but this type of building is not suitable for us when we don't have the infrastructure right now to deal with what our reality. And so, theory, it's great, but when you apply it, we're going to die. So I wouldn't support the legislation that's going forward right now, because in our community, it's going to kill us. That's what I have to share.
I mentioned, and these are very good points. I mentioned that SB 567 would protect tenants if their building is torn down, especially affordable housing development. They have to be guaranteed that they'll be able to move back into that building affordably, that there's compensation for that and the right of return. So that we need, let me just finish, that we need to have good legislation so that we don't encourage gentrification. Market rate development is going to go up, and having a certain set aside for affordable housing makes sense. But I'm also convinced that the current system, and you got knocked off before I had a chance, you probably didn't hear this, is really too complicated. And it's, what we need is more social housing at the right scale and in the right way, so that instead of having all these complicated funding sources, we have government projects that are well run and that are a suitable scale for the communities. Because the only way to combat gentrification is affordable housing. If a community is being gentrified, it makes sense to have affordable housing built in that community to keep people in place.
But that's where you're.
But we also need to have affordable housing scattered into other communities, not just into low-income communities, But here in Pasadena, our model is that we have inclusionary housing in downtown Pasadena, East Pasadena, throughout the city, that in areas that are not low income, but high end. And that's another advantage of the inclusionary model. It scatters height.
In LA is not Pasadena.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. In LA, we have a corrupt city council. You had two of the individuals arrested by going to trial, but around the goal line. See, we've lived this already. Where we're going to bring you back, and they don't bring us back. They don't bring us back.
Right. I can't speak to LA, Sophia. So I just want to say that some of the things we've learned here in Pasadena could be applied elsewhere, but we have to be sensitive to local concerns and local conditions. But we need affordable housing everywhere, not just in low-income communities, but throughout our city. And we need to make sure that it's permanent. And by the way, with those 55-year covenants, one of the policies that we're promoting is to make sure that when those covenants expire, there's funding to buy those properties and renew the covenants. That's what happened in our city with a project that was that the covenant ran out, and our housing director found a organization that was a nonprofit that bought up that property and continued the covenant for another 55 years. So that would be 110 years that it would be affordable. So, there's a lot of things that we need to do. It's a constant struggle to get good policies in place, make sure that they're implemented correctly, learn from our mistakes, because we do make mistakes in policy, correct them, and keep on. The focus is to make sure that low-income people are all decently housed, that they're not displaced, they're not driven out of their communities. And we work on that constantly. For example, one of the policies we have in our city is that any new affordable housing, 20% of it is available to people who've been displaced from our city. They can come and apply, and they get priority because they were displaced by the soaring housing prices. And so they get priority for any new affordable housing units that are being created in our city. So we're very conscious of all the issues that you bring up, Sophia. They're very valid, and we just have to come up with good policies to address the concerns that you've raised.
Yeah, but I do want to thank you very much, Anthony, for the presentation and being able to speak so passionately, so forcefully, and obviously it's as you mentioned, it's a Byzantine road trying to get all of this done. So, the shared experiences is something that and being able to talk about them and learn from them is a big thing.